Sometimes the only person who sees your worth is the one who has nothing left to lose. The rain came down in thin, steady sheets over Chicago's south side, blurring the streetlights into soft gold halos against the dark. Maya Brooks adjusted the hood over her braids and tightened her grip on her 6-year-old son's hand as they hurried past closed storefronts and a flickering bus stop sign. Her shift at the diner had run late again, and her feet ached from 10 straight hours on tile floors, but she kept her shoulders straight. Noah skipped beside her, his backpack bouncing against his small frame, talking about a spelling test and a library book he wanted to finish before bed. That was when she saw him. Under the weak glow of a streetlight, a man sat on the curb with a cardboard sign resting against his knees. The words were simple, written in careful block letters. Need a second chance. His coat was worn but clean, his posture too upright for someone who had completely given up. Water soaked through the edges of his sleeves, yet he didn't look down when people passed. He just watched the street like he was waiting for something more than spare change. "Mom," Noah whispered, slowing his steps. "He looks cold." Maya's first instinct was to keep walking. Rent was due in 4 days. Her bank account had less than $300 in it. Kindness didn't pay electric bills. But something about the way the man held himself, quiet, dignified, almost familiar, made her stop. She remembered high school hallways and a tall boy who once stood between her and a group of kids who thought making jokes about her thrift store shoes was funny. Ethan Caldwell. She hadn't seen him in nearly 15 years. Life had moved fast after graduation. She'd become a mother at 22. He'd vanished into rumors of scholarships and tech startups. The man under the light had a beard now, a few silver strands near his temple, but the eyes were the same. Clear, observant. "Ethan," she said softly, unsure if memory was playing tricks on her. His gaze lifted, and for a second something flickered there, recognition, surprise, maybe even relief. He didn't smile. He didn't explain. He just nodded once. Cars passed. Water pooled along the curb. Noah slipped his small hand out of hers and held out the granola bar from his backpack. "You can have this," he offered. The man looked at the boy like he'd just been handed something far greater than food. Maya inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle into her chest. She didn't know why Ethan Caldwell was sitting on a wet curb with a cardboard sign. She didn't know what had happened to the confident kid who used to ace calculus and talk about building companies. All she knew was that her son was watching her, and the kind of woman she chose to be in this moment would teach him more than any book ever could. "We have some soup at home," she said finally. "It's not fancy, but it's warm." The walk to Maya's apartment was quiet except for the rhythm of rain against pavement and the distant rumble of the elevated train 2 blocks over. Ethan followed half a step behind, not speaking, not asking questions, carrying himself with a restraint that felt out of place on a man who claimed to have nothing. When they reached the brick building with peeling paint and a stubborn front door that only closed if you lifted it slightly before pushing, Maya did not apologize for the narrow hallway or the faint smell of fried onions drifting from another unit. She simply turned the key and stepped inside. The apartment was small but orderly, a couch that had seen better days, a kitchen table with one leg reinforced by a stack of old magazines, drawings from Noah taped carefully along the wall. Warmth greeted them from the radiator that clanked like it was clearing its throat. "Shoes by the door," Maya said gently, setting the rule the same way she always did. Ethan complied without hesitation. Noah ran to the kitchen and climbed onto his chair, swinging his legs as Maya poured the last of the tomato soup into a pot. She added water to stretch it, stirred slowly, and placed 3 bowls on the table. Ethan noticed she gave the largest portion to her son without thinking. He also noticed she did not sit until Noah had taken his first spoonful. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice steady but low, like someone who had not used it much in recent days. Maya nodded once. "You can take the couch tonight," she replied. "It is not much, but it is dry." Noah studied him with open curiosity. "Did you ever have a house?" he asked, tilting his head. The question landed softly, but carried weight. Ethan paused before answering. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I did." He did not elaborate. Maya did not press. After dinner, she washed the bowls while Noah read aloud from his library book, stumbling over long words and grinning when he got them right. Ethan listened, elbows resting lightly on his knees. eyes following the rhythm of a home that functioned on love rather than money. He watched Maya help her son with homework, her voice firm but patient, her back straight even when fatigue shadowed her eyes. Later, when Noah fell asleep in his small bedroom with a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, Maya handed Ethan a folded blanket. "There are rules," she said calmly. "My son comes first. Always. If you need to leave, you tell me. No surprises." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Understood," he answered. She turned off the kitchen light and walked to her room without asking for his story. Alone in the dim glow of the living room lamp, Ethan sat still, hands clasped, listening to the quiet hum of the building and the steady breathing of a child down the hall. For the first time in weeks, he was not surrounded by boardrooms or expectations or the weight of headlines. He was in a 200-square-foot living room with patched walls and mismatched furniture, and somehow it felt more honest than the glass towers he had once called home. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains in pale stripes, landing across the worn carpet and the coffee table stacked with overdue bills. Maya woke before her alarm, as she always did, listening for the small sounds that told her everything was still steady. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant rush of traffic, the soft breathing from Noah's room. For a moment she forgot there was someone on her couch. Then she heard it, the faint creak of springs shifting as Ethan sat up. She stepped into the living room already dressed for work, her diner uniform pressed as neatly as she could manage. Ethan was folding the blanket with careful precision, smoothing the edges like it mattered. He had shaved with a disposable razor from the bathroom cabinet. And without the beard shadow, he looked even more like the boy she remembered, only older, quieter, carrying something heavier behind his eyes. "There is coffee," she said, pouring the last of the grounds into the machine. "It is strong." He gave a small nod. "Thank you for letting me stay." She shrugged lightly, not dismissing it, but not elevating it either. It was raining. Noah padded out a few minutes later, hair tousled, still clutching his rocket ship nightlight. He stopped when he saw Ethan at the table. "Are you still here?" he asked, hopeful rather than surprised. "I am," Ethan replied. "If your mom will allow it." Noah grinned and slid into his chair. Maya handed her son a bowl of oatmeal, then placed a smaller portion in front of Ethan. She did not explain that it was the last of what she had until payday. She simply ate her own slowly and stood to rinse her bowl before the others were finished. Ethan noticed. He also noticed the envelope near the sink stamped final notice. He did not comment. Instead, he reached for a dish towel and began drying plates without being asked. Maya paused, watching him for a second. "You do not have to," she said. "I know," he answered quietly. "I want to." Later, after Noah left for school with a tight hug around his mother's waist, Maya grabbed her purse and keys. "I work until 4, she said. "You can stay here today, but if you leave, lock the door." He met her eyes, steady and direct. "I will be here." She hesitated, searching his face for something that would explain how a man who once talked about building technology that changed the world ended up sleeping on her couch. Instead of answers, she saw restraint. Pride held in check. "Everyone falls," she said finally. "What matters is how you stand back up." When she left, the apartment grew quiet again. Ethan stood alone in the small living room, sunlight revealing every crack in the paint and every careful repair Maya had made to keep things together. He walked slowly to the window and looked down at the street where children waited for buses and neighbors hurried to early shifts. In his pocket, a phone he had not turned on in weeks felt heavier than ever. For the first time since he disappeared from boardrooms and headlines, he did not feel like he was observing an experiment. He felt like he was being measured by something far more personal, something no balance sheet could calculate. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared, leaving the pavement outside damp and reflective under a pale winter sun. Ethan had not left the apartment. Instead, he had moved quietly through the small space, tightening the loose screw on the kitchen cabinet with a borrowed screwdriver from a neighbor, adjusting the crooked leg of the table so it no longer wobbled, sweeping the hallway outside the unit without being asked. None of it was dramatic. None of it erased the final notice envelope still resting near the sink. But when Maya stepped through the door at 4:15, exhausted from refilling coffee cups and balancing trays, she noticed immediately that something felt steadier. The cabinet door did not sag when she opened it. The table did not tilt when she set down her purse. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly as she took it in. Ethan stood near the window, hands at his sides, as if unsure whether he should explain himself. "You fixed it," she said simply. "It was loose," he replied. She studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Thank you." Noah burst in behind her, backpack half open, talking about a math quiz and a class project. He stopped when he saw the table. "It does not shake anymore," he announced proudly, as if he had done it himself. Ethan's mouth curved into the smallest smile. "Good tables should stand firm," he said. During dinner, which consisted of rice and canned beans stretched with seasoning, Maya's phone buzzed on the counter. She ignored it at first. When it buzzed again, Noah glanced at her. "Mom, maybe it is important." She wiped her hands and checked the screen. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. "The landlord." She stepped into the hallway to answer, keeping her voice calm and measured. Ethan could not hear the words, but he could see the tension in her shoulders through the cracked door. When she returned, she folded the phone carefully and set it face down. "We have until Friday," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Noah looked between them. "Until Friday for what?" Maya forced a small smile. "For grown-up things," she answered. After Noah went to his room to finish homework, silence settled again. Ethan stood and walked to the counter, picking up the envelope she had tried to hide under a stack of mail. He did not open it. He simply looked at the red letters stamped across the front. "Final notice." "How much?" he asked quietly. Maya's chin lifted. "Enough," she replied. He held her gaze, not challenging, not pitying, just present. "You helped me without asking for my story," he said. "Let me help you." She crossed her arms, posture straight despite the fatigue lining her face. "I did not bring you here for payment," she said firmly. "And I am not trading kindness for cash." The air between them shifted, not hostile, but charged with something deeper than pride. Outside, a black sedan rolled slowly down the block, tinted windows reflecting the brick buildings. Ethan's eyes flickered briefly toward the sound of the engine, then back to Maya. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression, not about money, not about power, but about timing. Friday was closer than she realized. And so was the world he had stepped away from. The black sedan did not leave. It idled at the corner beneath a broken streetlight, engine humming low and patient, as if it had nowhere else to be. Ethan saw it again the next morning when he walked Noah to school beside Maya, keeping a respectful step behind her as she greeted crossing guards and other parents. The car moved when they moved, slow enough to avoid attention, close enough to make his jaw tighten. Maya noticed too. "You expecting someone?" she asked lightly, though her eyes stayed forward. "No," he replied, voice calm but measured. She studied him for half a second, then looked back at the street. "Whatever is chasing you," she said quietly, "do not let it run through my son." The words were not fearful. They were protective. Ethan nodded once. "It will not." By Wednesday evening, the tension had thickened. News vans began appearing downtown. Their satellite dishes extended like metal flowers toward the sky. On the small television in Maya's kitchen, a headline scrolled beneath a photo that made her hand freeze midair. Caldwell Industries CEO missing for 21 days. The image showed Ethan in a tailored suit, clean-cut, confident, standing in front of a glass skyscraper that reflected the Chicago skyline. Noah looked from the screen to the man sitting at their table. "Mom," he said slowly, "that looks like him." Silence settled over the room like a held breath. Maya did not look at Ethan immediately. She turned off the stove, lowered the volume on the television, and then finally faced him. He did not deny it. He did not scramble for excuses. He simply met her gaze with the same steady eyes he had held under the streetlight. "You disappeared," she said softly, not accusing, just stating fact. "Yes. And now people are looking for you." "Yes." Noah glanced between them, confusion knitting his small brow. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table so he was eye level with the boy. "No," he said clearly. "But I left without explaining things. And sometimes when you lead a company that large, people panic when you step away." Maya absorbed that in silence. The rain had stopped days ago, but something else was approaching. The knock came at 8:15 that night, firm but not aggressive. Maya rose first. Ethan stood as well, instinctive, but did not move ahead of her. When she opened the door, two men in dark coats stood in the hallway. Polished shoes, discreet earpieces. Mr. Caldwell, one of them said, relief threading through his voice. The board has called an emergency session. The markets are reacting. We need you back. Maya felt the shift before she saw it. The man who had eaten rice and beans at her table straightened, not in arrogance, but in recognition of responsibility. Power did not rush into him. It settled like something familiar. He looked at her then, not at the men behind him. I never meant for this to touch your home, he said quietly. The hallway light flickered overhead. Downstairs, the black sedan engine shut off. Friday was less than 48 hours away, and the world that had been waiting for him had finally reached her door. The hallway felt smaller with two suited men standing beneath the flickering light, their polished shoes too clean for chipped linoleum floors. Ethan stepped forward at last, not past Maya, but beside her. Give us a minute, he told them calmly. The men exchanged a glance but nodded, retreating a few steps down the corridor. Maya closed the door softly, the click of the lock louder than it should have been. Inside the apartment, the air shifted. Noah stood near his bedroom doorway, clutching the frame with small fingers, eyes wide but not afraid. Are they taking you away? He asked. Ethan crouched so they were eye level again. No one is taking me anywhere, he said steadily. I walked away from my company. That is different. Maya watched him carefully. You walked away from billions of dollars, she said, not impressed, not intimidated. Why? Ethan exhaled slowly, as if the truth had been waiting at the back of his throat for weeks. Because I built something that grew faster than I could control. Investors, board members, expectations. Every decision was about profit margins. I needed to know who I was without all of it. He paused, eyes moving briefly to the small kitchen, the repaired cabinet, the envelope still on the counter. I did not expect to find the answer here. Maya's expression did not soften. My home is not a retreat center for wealthy men having identity crises, she replied evenly. There was no cruelty in her tone, only clarity. Ethan accepted that. I know, he said, and I never intended to burden you. She folded her arms, thinking. Friday is still Friday, she reminded him. Rent is still due. My reality did not disappear because yours paused. He nodded. Then let me handle it. Her chin lifted. With what? A wire transfer? A signature? With responsibility, he answered. Not as a billionaire. As someone who owes you honesty. Silence stretched between them, thick but not broken. Noah stepped forward quietly. If you have a lot of money, he said carefully, does that mean you can fix everything? Ethan looked at the boy, really looked at him. No, he said after a moment. Money fixes problems. It does not fix people. Maya's eyes flickered at that. Outside, the murmur of reporters had begun to gather at the end of the block. Voices carried faintly through thin walls. Word traveled fast in a city that watched the markets like weather reports. Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly and pulled out the phone he had kept powered off. He turned it on for the first time since disappearing. The screen lit up instantly with missed calls, urgent messages, headlines. He did not scroll. He looked at Maya instead. I can hold a press conference tomorrow, he said. Publicly. I can make it clear that my absence was my choice. I can end the speculation. And I can do it without dragging your name into it. Maya studied him, searching for arrogance, for manipulation. She found neither. Only a man standing at a crossroads between power and humility. You do what you need to do, she said finally. But do not make promises to impress me. Make decisions you can explain to my son. Ethan inclined his head once, accepting the standard. In the hallway, the men in suits waited. In the street below, cameras were beginning to line the curb. And inside a modest two-bedroom apartment, the balance of power had quietly shifted, not because of wealth, but because of who chose to stand with integrity when it mattered most. The next morning the block looked nothing like it had a week ago. Satellite trucks lined the curb, cables snaked across cracked sidewalks, and reporters stood beneath umbrellas even though the sky was clear. Microphones branded with network logos pointed toward the modest brick building. Maya watched from behind the curtain, her expression unreadable. She had never asked for attention. She had never chased it. Yet it had arrived at her door anyway. Ethan stood near the kitchen table in a borrowed suit delivered at sunrise by one of the men downstairs. The fabric fit perfectly, sharp lines replacing worn seams. But something about the way he held himself had changed. The suit did not define him now. He looked at Maya before stepping outside. I will not say your name, he told her quietly. I will not show this address. This stays yours. She held his gaze, searching for weakness, for ego, for any sign that he might turn her kindness into a headline. She found none. "Remember what I said," she replied. "Make decisions you can explain to my son." He nodded once. When he opened the door, the hallway filled with flashes of light and a wave of shouted questions. He walked through it without flinching, shoulders steady, steps measured. Down on the sidewalk, cameras lifted in unison as he stopped in front of the building. The city skyline rose in the distance behind him, steel and glass reflecting the morning sun. "I stepped away from my company by choice," he began, his voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "Not because of scandal, not because of failure, because I needed to remember who I was without power." Reporters called out about stock prices, about board pressure, about investor panic. He did not dodge the questions, but he redirected them. "Leadership is not about control," he said. "It is about accountability. Caldwell Industries will remain strong because it is built on more than one person." Upstairs, Noah stood on a chair near the window, watching carefully. "He looks different," he murmured. Maya folded her arms gently around her son's shoulders. "He is standing where he belongs," she said softly. Outside, Ethan paused before concluding. The moment stretched, cameras waiting for drama, for arrogance, for a triumphant return. "Instead," he said, "during the last 3 weeks, I was reminded that integrity does not live in skyscrapers. It lives in homes where promises are kept, where children are protected, where kindness is given without negotiation." The crowd quieted, sensing something real beneath the corporate language. "Effective immediately," he continued, "Caldwell Industries will launch a housing stability initiative in Chicago. Not as charity, as responsibility." Gasps rippled through the reporters. Questions shifted tone. This was not damage control. It was a redirection of power. Ethan finished without spectacle, turned, and walked back toward the building without taking further praise. When he re-entered the apartment, the noise of the street dimmed behind the closed door. He removed his jacket slowly, setting it on the chair with the same care he had used folding a borrowed blanket days earlier. Maya studied him. "Was that for the cameras?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "That was because Friday is still Friday." Outside, the headlines were already changing. Inside, the balance of respect had settled into something steady and undeniable. By Thursday evening the cameras were gone, but their presence lingered like a memory pressed into the pavement. The street outside Maya's building felt almost ordinary again, except neighbors now glanced up at her windows with quiet curiosity. Inside the apartment, the air carried something new, not tension, not spectacle, but possibility. The landlord arrived at 6 sharp, envelope in hand, posture stiff from years of collecting late payments. He did not expect to see Ethan seated calmly at the kitchen table beside Maya. There was no entourage, no security detail, just a man in a simple shirt with his sleeves rolled up. "I came about the balance," the landlord began, clearing his throat. Maya straightened, prepared to negotiate days she did not have. Ethan spoke before she could, his tone steady but respectful. "The rent will be paid in full," he said. He slid a cashier's check across the table, not dramatically, not as a display, but as fulfillment. Maya's eyes shifted to the check, then to him. "This does not buy ownership," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "It buys time." The landlord left with fewer words than he had brought. When the door closed, silence settled again. Noah ran from his room, relief lighting his face. "So we do not have to move?" he asked. Maya knelt, brushing a hand over her son's hair. "No, baby. We are staying." She looked up at Ethan, gratitude restrained by principle. "This is a loan," she clarified. He nodded. "Then we will call it that." Later that night, after Noah was asleep, they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The city hummed faintly beyond thin walls. "The housing initiative I announced," Ethan said carefully. "I want you to lead the Chicago branch." Maya blinked once, not startled but cautious. "I wait tables," she replied. "You also manage a household on limited income, negotiate with landlords, stretch groceries, and raise a child with discipline and dignity," he answered. "You understand instability better than any executive I know." She studied him, weighing sincerity against ambition. "You would put a single mother with no degree in charge of millions of dollars." "I would put someone with integrity in charge of responsibility," he corrected. She leaned back slightly, considering the gravity of what he was offering. This was not romance. This was partnership. If I say yes, she said slowly, it will not be because you are wealthy. It will be because the program works. Ethan inclined his head. Then build it in a way that makes it work. Outside, a light breeze moved through the block, carrying away the last traces of spectacle. Inside, the power dynamic shifted again, not upward, not downward, but level. Friday arrived quietly the next morning, no longer a threat, but a marker. Maya walked Noah to school with her chin lifted, not because cameras were watching, but because she had chosen her terms. And when she returned home, Ethan stood by the window, no longer a man hiding from his empire, but one learning how to use it without losing himself. 3 months later, the block no longer whispered about scandal, but about opportunity. The small apartment that once felt like a fragile shelter had become the planning ground for something larger than either of them expected. Maya stood at the same kitchen table, now covered with folders labeled Housing Stability Initiative, Community Partners, Budget Allocation. The wobbly leg was still reinforced with old magazines, but the cabinet door closed smoothly, and the final notice envelope was gone. Outside, early spring sunlight warmed the sidewalk where children rode bicycles in slow circles. Inside, Maya reviewed proposals from local shelters and nonprofit leaders, her voice steady as she spoke through numbers and timelines with a clarity that surprised even her. Ethan sat across from her, not at the head of the table, but beside it, listening more than directing. He had returned to the boardroom in the glass tower downtown, but he no longer stayed late for applause. When investors questioned the housing initiative's immediate profit margin, he answered without hesitation. Stability is long-term growth, he told them. And then he came home, not to a penthouse, but to the brick building where his perspective had changed. That evening they attended the first community meeting held in a renovated recreation center 10 blocks away. Folding chairs lined the basketball court. Families filled the room, cautious but hopeful. Reporters were present, but their tone had shifted from suspicion to observation. Maya stepped to the front when her name was called, her posture straight, her hands steady at the podium. She wore a simple navy dress, not designer, not borrowed, just chosen. Ethan stood in the back beside Noah, who wore a button-down shirt too big at the collar. You ready? Ethan whispered. Noah nodded proudly. Maya looked out over the room and began. This program is not about charity, she said clearly. It is about access. No child should wonder where they will sleep on Friday. No parent should choose between groceries and rent. The words were not rehearsed for cameras. They were lived. Applause rose slowly, then stronger, not because of her association with a billionaire, but because of her conviction. Ethan watched as the crowd responded to her, not him. For the first time in years, he felt something more powerful than control. He felt alignment. After the meeting, as people gathered around to ask questions, Noah tugged at his sleeve. You said money does not fix people, the boy reminded him quietly. But it can help them, right? Ethan crouched beside him, eyes soft. It can, he said, if the right people decide how to use it. Noah looked toward his mother, who was listening patiently to a woman describing her struggle with rising rent. Then Mom is the right person, he declared. Ethan smiled, not as a billionaire, not as a headline, but as a man who had finally understood the measure of worth. Later that night, back in the apartment where it had all begun, Maya stood by the window overlooking the same streetlight where they had first met again. The light no longer flickered. It glowed steady against the dark. Ethan joined her quietly. You changed my company, he said. She shook her head gently. No, she replied. You changed your priorities. In the next room, Noah's laughter echoed as he built a small tower from plastic blocks. Outside, the city moved forward, unaware that in a modest 2-bedroom apartment, power had been redefined not by wealth, but by dignity shared and responsibility chosen.